Hello, I'm Mark Price. I'd like to talk to you today about the Greatest Commandment. But first, there was an elderly couple walking down the street, and they were married maybe 70 years, so a lot of years they were together. And at one point, the man sort of leaned in toward his wife and says, "I just want you to know I love you." And she said, "What, louder?" And he said, "I just want you to know that I love you." And she said, "If you love me, you will tell the whole world." So he leaned in even closer and he whispered to her, "I love you." And she said to him, I said that if you really love me, you have to shout it to the whole world." And the man looked at his wife and said, "You are my whole world." See, and you thought it was going to be funny, huh? The gospel today, Matthew chapter 22, verses 34 to 40. When the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a scholar of the law, tested him by asking, "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" He said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the greatest and the first commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. The whole law and the prophets depend on these two commandments." The gospel of the Lord. So there you have it. The Pharisees are again trying to trip Jesus, trying to catch him, trying to set a trap for him. It's amazing how life hasn't changed. We see media and politicians doing that to each other still today, just trying to ask a question in a certain way to trip somebody up. And the Pharisees were doing that to Jesus all the time. The Sadducees, they just really were trying to get him to say something incriminating. And so today the big question is, what is the greatest of the commandments? And Jesus says, well, there are two. Love God, love one another. Now, it's important to remember that God gave Moses 10 commandments, and that those 10 commandments were handed down to the Jewish people. The Jewish people took those 10 commandments and created 613 more commandments, rules, regulations, things to live by, follow by, how to live your life. And then Jesus comes along and says, all you need are two: love God, love each other. And when he's being pressured to give an answer, that's his answer. There's two. And if you do these, then everything else falls into place. And just so we don't think it's the Jewish people who took 10 and made 613, my faith tradition, which is Catholic, we took Jesus's 2 and turned it into over 2,000. And we call it canon law. And these are the rules that my church gives us to live our lives by. But I keep going back to Jesus. And Jesus says there are two. And if you do these two things, everything else falls into place. And it's so difficult for us to love. We find it very, very hard because it's easier to complain. It's easier to look for fault in other people. And Jesus knew that. And yet he says that these are the two things we must do. In fact, he uses the phrase, with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. So we have to not just love one another and love God. We have to do it with all of our heart, our soul, and our mind. And yet, we're fight with each other so often, don't we? We look for the things that are different. People of faith will say, my faith is better than your faith, ha, 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 and point to something that they disagree with about your faith. People who are a couple, they look at each other and they seem to find fault more often than they should, and they focus on the fault rather than on the things that we are called to love each other about. And loving is tough. It's not a Hallmark card and chocolate bunny rabbits and flowers. As beautiful and fun and nice as those things are, the example of true love was given to us by Jesus when he outstretched his hands on the cross, saying, "I love you." and gave his life freely for all of us so that we would have heaven if we choose. He's given it to us. He's given us that gift out of love. It's up to us to live our lives in a way that gives us that gift, that allows us to accept that gift that he has freely given to us with his death on that cross. So what I thought I'd do today, since love is so important, is I have 10 ways to love according to the Bible. Listen without interrupting. From Proverbs 18. He who answers before he hears, his is the folly and the shame. Speak without accusing. From James chapter 1, verse 19. Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. Next, give without sparing. Proverbs 21:26. All day long he craves for more, but the righteous give without sparing. Pray without ceasing. Colossians 1:9. For this reason, since the day we heard about you, we have not stopped praying for you. We continually ask God to fill you with the knowledge of his will through all the wisdom and understanding that the Spirit gives. Answer without arguing. Proverbs 17:1. Better a dry crust and a piece of quiet than a house full of feasting with strife. Next, share without pretending. Ephesians 4:15. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. Next, enjoy without complaint. Philippians 2:14. Do everything without grumbling or arguing. Next, trust without wavering. Corinthians 13:7. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always preserves. Next, forgive without punishing. Colossians 3:13. Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. Finally, promise without forgetting. Proverbs 13:12. Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life. 10 ways to love according to the Bible. Loving is not easy, but Jesus says in today's gospel, the 2 most important commandments are to love God, to love each other with our entire heart, mind, and soul. So this is what we are called to do. A great story of love was told by an actor when I met him once. And it was an old couple in England that went to a pub and they ordered a bicky, a hard cookie, and then a cup of tea. The waitress brings out the bicky and the hot cup of tea. And this actor watched as the man took a sip of the tea and his wife took a bite of the bicky. But then he said he watched as the woman took her teeth out of her mouth and cleaned them, handed them to her husband. He put her teeth into his mouth. He then took a bite of the bicky, and she took a sip of the tea. And this actor I met said, "That's true love." And when I tell that story, kids, adults will say, "Yucky!" Well, yeah, love can be yucky. As I said earlier, there was nothing really sanitary and pretty and clean about Jesus dying for us on that cross. But we are called to love each other. Paul tells us that husbands, you're to love your wife as Christ loved the church. How did Christ show his love for the church? He died for the church. Let us figure out in our lives how to love each other fully, completely, and selflessly. Amen? This is Mark Price. Thanks for listening.